let's take a paper cup, right? You need the fibers to make the cups. You need to grow trees or bamboo. That takes time. You grow them, maybe you ship them to, somewhere in China where they get manufactured, or maybe the materials are grown in China, but then you manufacture the cups and then you ship them across the world, right? Like we're talking weeks to months. So you got to grow the tree, make the cup, ship it, and then in 10 seconds it's in the garbage. Like
Yeah.
how does that make any sense?
Welcome to the She Supply Chains podcast. This is Courtney, and we are so excited to have Michelle Lee joining us today. So welcome, Michelle.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited for our conversation.
All right, we always start off with asking for you to share a little bit about who you are, both personally and professionally.
Well, professionally, I work on carbon literacy and climate change. That wasn't always the case. I actually come from software sales. I used to work at Salesforce and DocuSign. So this is a bit of a pivot. But before that, I was a scientist. So it's not a linear per se. And I think
Yeah.
like as our careers progress, things get a little bit more linear, even though they may not have seemed like that when we were
Yeah.
younger in our age. But it's like, oh, okay, I see the dots connecting. But just in general, I love taking really complex subjects and breaking them down into things that are easy to understand, relatable, whether it was my time in software sales to what I do now around carbon literacy. I think for most people and how it's portrayed in the media, it can be very technical. Like, I need like some little twos beside an O, I need a little formula to understand, but it really isn't that complicated. And I really enjoy like helping people learn about it and creating different types of content. So I run Clever Carbon, where we do a lot of that work. And I also lead a nonprofit called Women and Climate, where we create a joyful, safe space for more women to learn and talk about climate. And yeah, I think this topic of supply chain is really interesting to our audience as well. And personally, I'm from Toronto, born and raised. I moved to San Francisco in 2012 for business school, ended up staying there for almost 8 years where I worked in tech. I lived in London for a year and a half, New York, and now I am back in Toronto because my parents are here. And in my spare time, I play a lot of pickleball.
All
I
right.
love this.
Yeah, I feel like there should be a whole supply chain episode on pickleball.
Okay, we're adding that to our list. I've never
We'll
played.
add it to the list.
Yeah.
Okay, so when did you realize, because I love your background, we like one of our fun things about doing these podcasts is actually researching the guests a little bit. And so you have this really interesting background. How did you know though, like what was your aha moment, if you will, or maybe it was a series of moments where you just knew like sustainability, this is the space I want to be in?
Yeah. I think personally, I have always just been really bothered by single-use waste. Like, where does this stuff go? Like, and then like even from a supply chain perspective, right? Let's take a paper cup, right? You need the fibers to make the cups. You need to grow trees or bamboo. That takes time. You grow them, maybe you ship them to, somewhere in China where they get manufactured, or maybe the materials are grown in China, but then you manufacture the cups and then you ship them across the world, right? Like we're talking weeks to months. So you got to grow the tree, make the cup, ship it, and then in 10 seconds it's in the garbage. Like how does that make any sense? And where does this stuff go, right? If we have 8 billion people on the planet, like not everyone is having I'm not going to say the S word, the coffee chain we all know. But if everyone is having, single use, coffee cups and takeout every day, maybe sometimes even multiple times a day, where does this stuff go? How do we have enough land on this planet to, create landfills where this is going to just like be its forever home? Or if we incinerate, like, what does that mean? So I think I was always curious about that and annoyed, like secretly bothered. So, even 10, 15 years ago, I was using reusable cups and reusable bags. And, in 2017, I went vegetarian and thought that I was like such a hippie. And I think like in San Francisco, especially working for companies like Salesforce and DocuSign, I learned a lot about doing business for good, giving back to the community, and what that means for customers, for sales, and for employee retention. And I was so proud to work for a company that gave you 7 volunteer days off. And, we would do beach cleanups. And, I think forest was a big topic at DocuSign because essentially the technology allows you to have less paper and cut down less trees, right? But there's also all these other benefits of having an electronic signature. There are emissions and other factors to consider, like data centers and all that stuff too. But
Mhm.
like, realistically, we don't need as many trees if we don't have as much paper that we need to sign. So I think all those different things just led me to sustainability. And when I moved to London, I was working with DocuSign at the time, and I attended an employee resource group meeting. And one of my colleagues at the time, Ryan, he did this fantastic presentation on the work we do with DocuSign for forests. And I was drinking all the Kool-Aid. And I actually, organizing sustainability related initiatives myself. So I organized Veganuary at the office. In the month of January, we had a little committee. We had several different activities. Our head of sales ended up being in an article for Veganuary. It was such a win-win-win. Like me as an employee that's in sales, I got to do this internal project, meet other colleagues, teach them about the health impacts, like introduce new dishes to them. And we got into the press, why wouldn't we do these types of things? And so my time in London was transformative. I had the opportunity to do this and meet other colleagues who care deeply about sustainability, but then also just seeing the public transportation, like at a corner convenience store, you can buy shampoo bringing in your own bottle, right? Like that's stuff
Mm,
that we buy at specialty shops, right? No, this is a
mm,
corner convenience store. And, all the feminine hygiene products, you walk into a convenience store, it's like all plastic. In the UK, it's all zero plastic, organic
mm,
materials. So, I just like the most amazing vegan restaurants in the world. So that really inspired me to do more. Like I thought I was doing so well in San Francisco, but then I was like, oh wow, there's like a world out there.
mhm,
So one thing that I noticed was that a lot of the content around sustainability was very negative at the time.
mm,
And it was like very, don't do this, don't do that, this is bad, this is good. It was very binary, like duality.
mhm,
And like I think sustainability is not binary, and there's many different levels, 50 shades of gray, if you will. And I wanted to leverage my knowledge of enterprise marketing, of taking complex topics and breaking them down into simpler, bite-sized, digestible pieces of content. And that's kind of how Clever Carbon was born and how I got into the work. And it was a side project that eventually became full-time and, working with some of the biggest organizations in the world, from the NBA to, amazing partners like MasterCard.
mm.
Okay, so you're traveling the globe and you meet somebody. How do you describe to them like what you do at Clever Carbon?
Yeah. I would say in a very like short sentence, like I teach people about carbon footprint in a really hip and fun way. Yeah.
So,
I
Michelle, you
really
talked.
appreciate
Oh,
your. I was gonna say I love your story too about like I saw all these things and you're like I do
yeah.
think when you go out in the world and you see some other places and they can make such big change, you're like, why can't we do that? Like if they can do it, we can do it. It's
Exactly.
inspiring.
Yeah. So Michelle, you talked about, starting in Silicon Valley, Salesforce, DocuSign, and then you pivoted to climate action. So can you talk about how your background in tech, specifically in customer success, kind of digital storytelling, how did that shape your philosophy? That you kind of talked about, you were kind of hippie, like this that sustainability needs to be hip, cool, and not
Mhm.
intimidating, and maybe not as like shaming. I think as some people
Mm.
can make it. I have felt like sometimes I'm like, gosh, I know when I had just moved. It's a funny story. I just moved back to the States from Switzerland. And I hadn't even been in the States long. I had a dinner party and people like, "Where's your recycle bin? Why are you not recycling?" I was like, "I just got here. Like, give me a minute. Like, it's okay." I
Yeah.
was like, "Gosh, you know, like,
Yeah.
whoa, it's like it's like a lot of pressure." But
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
you're
it's
like,
like, yeah.
are you sure it doesn't end up in the same container anyways? Like,
Well, yeah, you can I've asked those questions in the office sometimes. I'm like, "Is this really being recycled?" But anyway,
yeah.
sorry, way off topic. But can you just share like that journey and how that skill set has really helped you as you think about climate and what you do today?
Yeah. Like being in software sales, like software is innately boring. Like it is. It's just it's boring stuff. But look at Salesforce. Like look at the marketing machine it has become, making customer service software like just so fun. Such it's like a,
It's
you
so true.
know,
I see it. I'm like, I want to go work there. I don't
Me
even
too. When I
know
right?
saw you were at
really what they
Salesforce,
do,
Yeah.
but I
they
see
seem
it.
very
I'm
hip and
like,
cool. I would tell
it
you that.
does.
It
Yeah.
does.
Especially with like Trailblazer and the little Astro, like the forest, like folk, like the cartoons, like they've taken something, it's a database, you know, it's literally a database, but they've built such an amazing story around it and such prestige. And I think my time at Salesforce, like I received some of the best training in the world on how to give
Mm,
presentations, right? How to capture an audience. We even
mm,
had training on how to whiteboard with customers, right? Like
mm,
we're getting into the nitty gritty. Like, you know, they don't joke around when it comes to training. And also having a lot of opportunities where I could raise my hand and be like, oh, I want to speak at this webinar that's coming up. I want to speak at Dreamforce. And then being
mm,
like, yeah, go run with it. And so I had all these opportunities to tell stories and to build like, this is the end. In the end, what I want someone to walk away feeling and knowing. And I feel like just watching how they brand stuff, how they, you know, create their materials. Like I learned so much from that experience. And like, you know, some of the customer service stuff is pretty simple, but when you get into things like with DocuSign, you like, what is a signature? Like what is an electronic signature, right? Most people think that a signature is like you scribbling something over and over in a way that only you can do, right? It looks the same, so it's you know that's what makes it valid. But actually there's so much more to signature, and when you have to switch a bank, you know, a customer that cares so much about security,
mm,
compliance over to an electronic signature, that
mm,
sales cycle is very difficult. But like those are
mm,
the types of scenarios I got to you know, I encountered. And you know, to be able to tell the story in such a way where the customer's leaving at the end being like, oh my God, I can't leave without an electronic signature. I need this thing tomorrow. Like those are the types of, you know,
Mm.
feelings that we want to create and urgency that we want to create because, you know, when you're in the business and when you're doing the sales, you do believe that you're adding value to your customer and vice versa. Otherwise, they wouldn't buy your product. But yeah, I had all these opportunities where I worked to take these complex subjects. And not even to mention before that, I was a scientist. So I studied biology and chemistry. I did a Master of Science in cancer genetics. I was mutilating my model organism was C. elegans. So like I'm doing all these experiments and trying to explain my research to other folks. So like, you know, that is also very boring. But how do you bring the story to life? That's kind of the opportunities that I've had. And when it comes to carbon, it's the same thing. Like you can't
mm.
even see it. Like you can't see carbon, right? So how do you make something like that interesting? And I'd love to give you an example. So, when we're talking about carbon literacy, it can be something as simple as like, you know, the carbon footprint of a vegetarian meal is 600 grams of carbon emissions, carbon footprint. A serving of chicken has a carbon footprint of 1,300 grams. A serving of beef has a carbon footprint of, what's your guess, Courtney, Katie?
For five,
You said chicken was what?
1,300.
1,300.
3,000.
Vegetarian, 3,000?
I'm saying
Okay.
5.
5, 7,700, right? On
What?
average, right?
Ah,
So, you know, creating these like small moments where people can relate and then a bigger picture, like pre-industrial levels of carbon in the atmosphere is 280 parts per million. It was about that level for about a million years. And in those million years, We had a stable climate. The last ice age had passed. We had amazing biodiversity, like 4 billion years of evolution, and 280 parts per million was that special concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere where we had the stable planet. But since then, a lot has changed. So, in the way that I kind of explain it and teach it, okay, Christopher Columbus, when he sailed the ocean blue, it's around 280 parts per million.
Mhm.
The first Olympic Games, 1896, we had reached 295 parts per million. When the Titanic sank in 1912, around 300 parts per million. In the 1960s, when we formed the Beatles, it was around 300 and I think 30 something. But most importantly, I think the biggest milestone of humanity, you'll agree with me, 1989, Taylor Swift was born, right? 352 parts per million, right? So I'm trying to use pop culture to bring in these scientific aspects and help people understand like how things are changing. And yeah, from this journey of like tech sales and
Mhm.
scientific, communication, like, you have to be creative and you have to make it fun. Otherwise, people are not going to be curious and they don't want to engage.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this ties in beautifully to like the next question we were going to ask was a little bit about. I loved how you talked about you're like Salesforce is just a database, and yet people get so excited about it. And I think like that's really what you're trying to do is get people excited about learning more. And so you talk a lot about the customer experience and how do you go through that cycle with them? Where do you think we're missing the mark then as we're trying to get like your average person to understand more about what's going on in the environment? And then you have like these 2-minute carbon footprint quiz tools. So I was wondering too if you could talk a little bit about those too and how they help.
Yeah. I think where we're sort of missing the piece right now is that there just aren't enough carbon literate individuals, especially at the C-suite level, at the board level, at the country leadership, municipal leadership levels. Like people they're not really carbon literate. And as a result, it's not emphasized, it's not prioritized, and you don't know what you don't know. It's not if you know, you know, it's if you don't know, you don't know, right? So I think at a very fundamental and foundational level, we're just trying to help everyone understand what carbon footprint is and how it relates to your personal life. And that's where the carbon footprint quiz comes in, right? You do the quiz, it's 5 questions. It takes under 2 minutes to do, and it's fun. There's emoji confetti, and, you know, you learn that, oh, it's my commute, right? Like, my commute has a big impact on my carbon footprint. My personal flying,
Mm,
business travel is not technically your carbon footprint. And then it's your diet, and then it's your home energy, right? Knowing those things are like the big levers that you can pull, I think is really helpful in helping people take their actions because especially when it comes to food, I think from a supply chain perspective, it's actually interesting to know. So globally, steel emissions is about 10% of global emissions. Anything above 1% is very significant. Even commercial flying is around 2.5 to 3%.
Wow.
yeah.
So steel is like
Yeah.
10%. Cement production, most people don't know, but cement is very, very emissions heavy because there's a lot of energy usage, there's different chemical processes that happen, and carbon dioxide gets released into the atmosphere because of that. It's about 10%. Food emissions globally is 25%, right? So we're talking about the entire sort of process from, growing to food waste, right? All of that is around 25%. And when it comes to commute, right, you can't really control if the subway comes right to your doorstep or the bus comes every 10 minutes,
Mhm.
but you can control what you eat, and you eat most of us who live in this part of the world are lucky to eat 3 times a day, and that's really a big lever that we can pull. But, most people don't even know that food emissions are that big. And especially, I think now cities are becoming more aware. In fact, in, Toronto Climate Week, we just had that in June. Like one of the big emphasis was food because food emissions are the highest emissions in
Mm.
Toronto. Um, but yeah, the quiz aims to make this fun. It aims to make it personal because after you do the quiz, you get a badge with your name and your footprint that you can download. So we just want to create these tools that people will learn, and it's fun and it's familiar.
I love that. So one of Clever Carbon's initiatives, which I think is brilliant, is called the coffee menu, which visually breaks down the carbon footprint of everyday choices. So when you think about this for supply chain, you talked about this a little bit.
Yeah.
How important is it for procurement logistics to move past kind of scope 3 definitions and really start displaying like raw carbon data as clearly
Yeah.
as you think about as like the menu?
Yeah. It's tough for organizations and procurement teams and supply chain teams to really get nitty-gritty because a lot of the data that they're using is based off of spend and is based off of emissions factors. So it's not even 100% accurate and granular, but it does provide that baseline. And I haven't been on a procurement team. I haven't had the privilege of being part of, hands dirty in a supply chain kind of work function. But a lot of I think there's so many things that supply chain teams are grappling with. Like, is it ethical? Are they using fair labor? And then there's the security pieces, and then you have the sustainability pieces as well. So I definitely have a lot of empathy for folks that are
Mm.
working on supply chain teams. But I do think that you have your supply chain teams and then you have your customers, and then having this type of data for your customers to make decisions off of is really helpful, right? You look at the coffee
Mhm.
menu, oh, like a regular coffee or an espresso is 50 grams, has a carbon footprint of 50 grams. A dairy latte is 350 grams, right?
Wow.
If we could standardize that kind of data
Yeah.
for supply
Yeah.
chain teams,
Wow.
right? Like, you know, I don't know if you feed it into a central database and it has all the
Yeah.
emissions factors there, and then you can just see, like, wow, wouldn't that be amazing?
I think it
Um,
would make it real, like in real time,
It
and really
would.
yeah,
help with
Yeah.
our decision making. Because I do think people want to
yeah,
do the right thing, but I do
yeah,
think the data part of it is hard for
yeah.
sure.
It
Yeah.
is hard. And then you've got trade-offs, right? Like,
Yeah.
you're going to ship something by air. That means it's going to come in 2 days versus you're going to do maritime and it's going to come in 3 weeks. What does that mean to the business? And I feel like customers now have such a high expectation of, like, Amazon Prime is not next day delivery. It's next hour, like
Yeah.
that's kind of like the standard that we're getting to. Like everything's just too convenient. And customers want those things that come really fast, but there's a cost to it too, right? Like shipping things through air is much more expensive than maritime.
I do appreciate
So
how Amazon gives you that little benefit to not get it immediately.
until like Wednesday. Wednesday's my day.
Wednesday, you
Like,
might wait like
everything to
2
come on
days.
Wednesday.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead,
Yeah.
Katie.
No, I like it. Well, this kind of, Michelle, leads into the next question, which was, with Clever Carbon, you're really trying to educate folks and make it easy to understand so it's transparent. But kind of as you said, like sometimes there's choices and trade offs. And like if we had that data, how might we use it? Any thoughts on how supply chains could those start? Like if they don't have the data, how do they start getting it? And then again, where have you seen them balance this well between these trade offs of cost, carbon, service? Who are you seeing do this well? Or maybe even, I shouldn't even say, I don't even know if anyone's doing it well yet, but anybody even implementing a structure yet to do it well?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to the data itself, like most large suppliers have the data. They're used to getting asked, and they probably do their own reporting themselves. I think it's the small suppliers that a lot of organizations struggle with, right? Like, obviously, if you want to do business with a large company, you're going to do what they ask. But sometimes, you don't have the tools, you don't have the budget, you don't have the time. Like, so it's like, okay, do the spend based emissions factor. That's like the easiest
Mhm.
thing. But what I'm seeing in industry is a lot of supplier programs. Like, I work with pharmaceutical companies and they do a lot of work with their suppliers, educating them on their emissions, the differences that you have if you ship with this versus with that, electrolyzing, electrification of your fleet and that type of thing. I think the supplier programs are really, really effective and important, especially for the big organizations, right?
Mm.
They can really move the needle and they have the power to ask. And then remind me, Katie, of the latter part of your question as well.
Well, it's one of these things, and a lot of times in supply chain, we can feel this pressure to, is it service versus cost? But it's almost like you're adding in
Right.
this other element here
Mm.
too. And so just kind of curious if you're seeing anybody really look at this on a regular basis and if they have a framework for their trade-offs. And it's okay if you don't know. I was just kind of curious.
Yeah, I don't know that I have like an exact example because while I'm very curious and would love to learn, most ESG teams that I work with are, more on the education and employee engagement side.
Mhm.
So we don't
Gotcha.
typically get into like the nitty-gritty of that.
Okay. I love this next fact. So, you famously penned an open letter to Elon Musk pointing out that while carbon capture technologies are cool, carbon footprint literacy is just as vital. And so, in manufacturing and logistics, many leaders do look for kind of this silver bullet technology fix to offset emissions. So, why
Mhm.
is, as you talked about, optimizing kind of internal behaviors and baseline literacy more sustainable strategy than relying on a future technology offset?
Love, Courtney, that you mentioned that I famously penned
I'm saying
this
it's famous.
letter.
I think that's
We
amazing.
think it is. We're
I
like,
think it's amazing.
open letter to Elon Musk. Let's do
Yeah, I
it.
Yeah,
know.
yeah. That's pretty funny because like in the early days of Clever Carbon, we were just being super cheeky and like thinking of different ideas that we could like get attention. And, at the time, Elon had announced that he was giving 100 million for carbon capture technologies. And when you're in the industry, a couple years ago, it was viewed as very controversial because it was seen as a license for companies to continue emitting,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Mm,
Um, so, I think some organizations were against it. And,
Mm.
I think for me, carbon literacy is just as important because we it's urgent. Like, I don't say this very often because I want to create carbon literacy as like a safe space for people to learn and, continue living their lives. But like, it's serious. And I think, especially with this year, we have a super El Nino drumming up. Supply chains are going to be disrupted, raw materials like commodities pricing is going to go whack. And we need everything everywhere all at once, right? There's that
Mhm.
movie, the same thing. So while we do need the technologies, it's a very complicated task to capture carbon or remove carbon from the atmosphere, right? Like capture is one aspect where, you may have like a dirty pipe and shoot and you capture the carbon there and it doesn't go into the atmosphere. But there are other technologies like carbon removal because there's too much carbon in the air, it's trapping heat, and we need less carbon in the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide can stay in there for hundreds of years. So not only do we need to like capture what we're doing now, we need to remove a lot of gigaton scale of carbon from the atmosphere. And that type of technology is going to take time to develop. In
Mhm.
the meantime, we as individuals need to understand the impacts of our behavior and our actions on what's currently happening and how we're contributing. And some people like using the analogy of a bathtub, right? Like you have a bathtub and the tap is kind of like carbon emissions. So yes, you need to turn off the tap, but
Mhm.
if you need an empty bathtub, the water needs to be removed as well. So how do you do that? So like
Mhm.
we have to do everything all at once. And someone that was on a panel that I moderated said, this is like the biggest change management challenge that humanity will ever face
Mhm.
is mitigating climate change, mitigating carbon. And if you don't look outside your window and see a train moving carbon, see a truck moving carbon, if you don't see people talking carbon, we are not taking this seriously.
Mhm.
And I kind of agree with that. So when it comes to, silver bullet, there really is none. But if people just aren't educated, it's the easiest thing. You could very
Yeah.
easy to educate,
Start there.
right? It
Yeah.
has to start there because everybody needs to change. Like, we're not going to be able to live life as is. Whether it's like having a plant-based meal every, 2 days or something, like we're all going to have to do a little bit of something and we have to do it soon.
Mhm.
I like that because I think too, it's such a big problem to solve. There isn't going to be one solution, and different
Mhm.
solutions will have different trade-offs. But if everybody's at least talking about it, like you can't help but like get people moving
Yeah,
forward then too.
exactly. Yeah.
Um, okay, so you use the phrase we've got to do something everywhere, all the time, all the places. Um, you are an advisor to what's called the Blue Standard by Oceanic Global and really working on measurable impacts that establish like universal like accountability
Mhm.
for sustainable business leadership across all industries. So I really like this because it's looking across and everywhere. I'm curious as you're having to create these frameworks, how do you design a standards that it's like rigid and structured enough that it holds up, but
Mhm.
also flexible enough that like big businesses, small businesses can still adopt it and use it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And like there's a few different tools that you can create to have businesses take more sustainability action. So the Blue Standard, for example, is really focused on positive action for the ocean. And that's why I was very passionate about it and wanted to get more involved in spreading awareness for the Blue Standard. And you have other ones like B Corp, right? That's another sort of business framework, business standard. It's a little bit more all encompassing. It, has things around labor and, treatment of workers and all these different components. But like the Blue Standard is really focused on positive impacts for the ocean and reducing plastic and, making the ocean a better place. But then you also have things like standards, like and goals that you can set, like SBTIs. I don't know if you that's a term that you've maybe heard thrown around a little bit, science-based targets initiative. So
Yes.
companies can
Mhm.
like set a target, get it
Mhm.
verified, and it's public. And like part of these are virtue signaling, right? Like
Mhm.
you're either virtue signaling to your customer or you're virtue signaling to your investor, or a customer. And then you have policy where like if you don't do it, you're going to get hit. So you have all these different tools to motivate businesses to take the action that you want them to take. But for something like the Blue Standard, it's actually there's different levels of verification. And for example, they verify events. If you're throwing a summit, if you're throwing some kind of conference, you can have it Blue Standard verified. So they'll look at things like, are you using single use waste?
Mhm.
Are you educating the attendees about sustainability? Are you serving more plant-based foods and that type of thing for events? And then for organizations, like one of their clients is Corona, right? Corona is subscribes to the
Mhm.
Blue Standard verification as well, and that's more in your business operations and probably in your supply chain as well. But yeah, it's very difficult to do a one size fits all. So I don't think it's possible. There's definitely different levels of verification. And I think like the first level has to be easy so that everyone wants to do it, gets involved, and has that foot in the door phenomenon. And then you can continue layering. And it's an iterative process. Like as we learn more, as businesses become more savvy in improving their operations, reducing plastic, there's always additional things that we can do and like push the bar higher in a good way, not moving the
Yeah.
goalpost per se, but like, increasing the standard. And so, I'm really excited to see what the Blue Standard is going to look like in a couple of years, and hopefully I'll get to shape its future as well.
That's great. So now we're going to switch over to kind of our fun advice questions. So, Women in Climate is explicitly designed to be a joyful and safe space. So, as a thought leader in this space, and I can hear your passion for this
Yeah.
topic, how do you protect your energy and maintain some joy and optimism while tackling, like you talked about, some like the really heavy problems in our planet? And as your point, like we need to be urgent about it. We see it all
Yeah.
changing in front of us. So, how do you do that
Yeah.
for yourself?
I play pickleball. No, I'm just kidding.
Pickleball. You
But
might have to be
not.
playing pickleball.
But I think that when we don't take action, like like every day I'm taking action through the work that I'm doing, through the content we create, through the workshops that I do, the keynotes that I deliver. I am creating people who are more carbon savvy and carbon curious, and that keeps me going. And very seldomly do I feel very helpless and a little bit like depressed. And I know people who actually feel like that a lot, like a lot of the time. Actually, my co-founder for Women in Climate, Stephanie, part of the reason why she started Women in Climate with me was because she was feeling a lot of climate anxiety.
Mm,
But I think I'm innately just a very positive person, like, but I'm grounded. Like, I know we need urgent action. I know, things are gonna, change really quickly. Hopefully, I can scale my message and inspire more action. And every day I'm working hard towards that goal. So that's kind of how I keep myself sane.
I just also appreciate too, like the intentionality of building joy
mhm,
into this. I think it's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
you founded quite a few things, but one of them is the Carbon Newbie Summit, and it was at New York City Climate Week, and it was to bring climate literacy to the masses. And I think sometimes in highly technical fields, supply chain, engineering, scientific research on cancer cells,
Yeah.
um, sometimes newcomers can feel like they're on the outside or like, do I really want to join this? It
mhm,
sounds so complex and difficult to grasp. What's a piece of advice that you have for newbies in this
Hmm.
space who want to learn more and build more sustainable
mhm,
supply chains, but they don't have that background or degree?
Yeah. Actually, I have like a thought for the experts in the space and people who are already in the space is
mm,
to be inviting and make this an accessible space because we end up in these echo chambers. Like you go to climate events, and eh, it's global work and you see people around the world and you see the same people a lot. And it's the same people speaking, it's the same messaging. We need more people thinking about this. We need every
mm,
job to be a climate job. And so for those people who are in the space, like you want to have an intelligent conversation on long-term energy, storage with someone else who is a peer in the field. But also, let's invite those who are newer to the space, be patient, explain new things, make them feel welcome because I was one of those people who walked into a room full of climate savvy people and, what is DAC? What is SBTi? Like what is SASB? And there's so many acronyms and everyone knows each other. It's a very intimidating space. So, um back to your original question for those that are new, I think it starts with education. Like that's what I did when I really started getting very interested and curious about climate. I did a course on Coursera. It's called like Intro to Sustainability. It's
Oh.
by the University of Illinois. And what I really loved about that course was that it kind of went through everything from the ocean to carbon to agriculture. And I got a really full picture of what sustainability kind of looks like. And, I did a lot of reading, read a ton of books, listened to podcasts. And those are things that you can do on your own and you don't need to like go out and network and meet people. So, I encourage folks to just create space and create time to learn and, look at your own personal life and what are some of the easy things that you can do to reduce your impact on the planet. I don't want to be prescriptive, but, you know, get curious about that and take action.
All right, I think that was our last question. So this has been so great and I think so informative. And thank you for just sharing your passion and your journey. And I think all of us can be accountable to like leave here and take something small and do something different for the planet. So thank you so much, Michelle.
Yep,
Yeah.
thank you. We'll also have all of your info like linked in our show
Yes.
notes too, so people can go and explore and learn more too from Clever
Great.
Carbon.
I really appreciate it. This was like these questions were so thoughtful. Like honestly, I
Oh,
read them and I was like, "Oh my God, you really had to look through my stuff to like
Katie,
find
Katie,
the Elon
Katie's the
Musk
like
letter."
researcher. Like she, yeah, I'm
It's
like,
like one of my favorite things. I love